Working at a company and you've been there for in the same role for 3 or 4 years and you love this company. I mean, you believe in the company, you believe in the mission, but the problem is there's this creeping feeling that it's time for you to do something new. You're not really playing to your strengths. You're not getting to use your strengths every day. Like you wake up in the morning on Monday and you're like, oh my goodness, I have to go to work. Sometimes maybe even getting sick. That's a signal for you that like, oh, maybe it's time for you to do something new. So what do you do? What do you do? One of the experiences I had is I was working on Wall Street and I had been an equity analyst for about 8 years. I was an institutional investor ranked analyst and really at the top of my game. And it was like, it's time for me to do something new. And I went to my boss. I said, hey, I want to do something new. It feels like it's time. And he said, really, no, really, we like you right where you are. So within a year, I left. Had it been possible for me to jump to do something new, to disrupt myself inside of the organization, I wouldn't have left. I would have stayed where I was. And so that led me on this journey of how do I build out a framework or codify a process so that people that are high performers who want to stay at an organization that they love will stay. What does that look like? You're bored. Why? Because you're no longer learning. It's not that I don't like this company. It's not that I don't like this boss. It's just that I am not learning anymore. So that's the first thing that you want to understand is that everyone's on an S curve. Okay, now that you're at the top of that S curve, if you try to stay there too long, your plateau will become a precipice.
As I said before, this Harvard model of negotiation is based on 4 principles. Before we go into these principles, we might want to reflect for a second, why principles? Why not rules? And that's quite interesting that the Harvard people choose to go for principles and not for rules, because if you have rules like in laws, chances are very high that that is too linear and too strict, and that people simply think if they follow these kind of rules, everything will be fine. Whereas if you have principles, it is much more organic, it's much more wider, because you have lots of ways how to fulfill those principles. So it is important to realize that the Harvard people choose principle for cooperation and not rules. So that because cooperation needs the freedom and the creativity. So let's go for these 4 principles. If you remember, we talked about, when we talked about the 5 ways of how to deal in a negotiation, that we said, okay, we do have these high interest or low interest in relationship, and we have the high interest or low interest into the issue you want to have. And let's assume for a second you're negotiating with somebody you like and you find very sympathetic. Then it could be that you have a tendency to give in and to accommodate to the other person, so that you have a tendency to play lose-win. Or on the other extreme, you do actually don't like the other person. You might even hate the other person. And then it is possible that you have a tendency to play win-lose, because you don't like the person, you don't care for the relationship. So the Harvard people said, okay, in order to avoid these risks, that the quality of relationship interferes with your interest in the issue, you should separate them at all. So the first principle is, and that's easy said and hard to achieve, separate the person from the issue. In real life, that would mean you can negotiate very hard, but you should never be hard on the person, unfriendly and so on and so forth, because it is in your own interest to understand the interests of the other people, and therefore the other partner is not your enemy, it's actually your partner. Otherwise you don't get what you want. Because otherwise, if you could simply order what you want, you wouldn't negotiate. So the other party is your partner. So the first principle is separate the person from the issue. Easy said, hard actually to live. The second principle we already heard when we illustrated with the pumpkin example. If you remember, 3 people had a position. They all wanted the pumpkin. Since there was only one pumpkin, it was not possible to give everybody the pumpkin. There was
allowing among a group of highly ambitious, competitive people to stand out as the superstar. So we heard stories of consultants saying, we put together these 100-slide decks, and we've spent the entire weekend perfecting them. I mean, 100 slides, like a client does not want 100 slides. So why do we do it? We do it because it's our opportunity to prove how smart we are, how smart and analytical we are. It has nothing to do with what the client needs. It has nothing to do with maintaining the competitiveness of the firm. And in fact, there's research to suggest that that kind of overwork is actually undermining, ultimately, of a firm's competitiveness because it burns people out. There's all sorts of negative repercussions of that kind of requirement. Quite frankly, as an organizational scholar, I'm much more interested in actually what organizations can do about this. If they really are interested.